Imagine walking into work one day and meeting someone who, according to official records, doesn't exist. Someone whose name appears on a memorial wall, whose funeral was attended by hundreds of military personnel, whose life officially ended 5 years ago in a classified operation that went horribly wrong. Now imagine discovering that this dead person has been living among us all along, moving through military installations across the country under false identities, conducting routine inspections while carrying secrets that could change everything. This is the story of Captain Victoria Kane, a woman who made the ultimate sacrifice for her country, not by dying, but by agreeing to disappear completely. For 5 years she lived as a ghost, watching from the shadows, ensuring our military was ready for the impossible missions that no one else could handle. But on one ordinary Tuesday morning, Iron Eagle Air Force Base, an emergency would force the dead to fly again, revealing a truth so extraordinary that it would redefine what it means to serve beyond the call of duty. What you're about to hear challenges everything we think we know about sacrifice, duty, and the lengths some people will go to protect others, even when the world believes they no longer exist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted Iron Eagle Air Force Base in shades of gold and amber as the day shift reported for duty on what seemed like any other Tuesday in October. The sprawling military installation, nestled in the high desert of Nevada, buzzed with its usual rhythm of controlled chaos. Transport trucks rumbled along the perimeter roads, security patrols made their rounds, and the distant sound of jet engines warming up on the runway provided a constant backdrop to military life. Hangar 6 stood like a cathedral of modern warfare, its massive steel doors already open to the crisp morning air. Inside, the sleek, angular silhouette of an F-117 Nighthawk dominated the cavernous space. The stealth fighter's distinctive geometric design seemed to absorb the fluorescent lights above, its dark surface appearing to bend reality itself. To the untrained eye, it looked like something from a science fiction movie. To the experienced ground crew of the 49th Fighter Wing, it represented the pinnacle of American aerospace engineering, a machine capable of penetrating the most heavily defended airspace in the world and emerging undetected. The hangar floor gleamed with fresh wax, reflecting not just light, but the pride of the men and women who maintained these incredible aircraft. Tool cabinets lined the walls with military precision, each drawer labeled and organized according to regulations that had been refined over decades of operations. The smell of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and industrial cleaning solvents created an oddly comforting aroma that every aircraft mechanic recognized as the scent of purpose. Airman First Class Jordan Wells arrived precisely at 0630, his desert camouflage uniform crisp and his toolkit ready for another day of keeping America's most secret aircraft in perfect flying condition. At 23, Jordan had been working on military aircraft for 3 years, long enough to develop genuine expertise, but not quite long enough to lose his enthusiasm for the technical marvels he maintained daily. His specialty was avionics systems, the complex electronic brains that made modern aircraft more than just flying machines. "Morning, Wells," called Master Sergeant Christopher Bailey as he emerged from the hangar office, coffee mug in one hand and a clipboard thick with maintenance schedules in the other. At 41, Bailey had been around military aviation for over 2 decades. His weathered face and steady demeanor spoke of someone who had seen everything the Air Force could throw at him and had learned to handle it all with professional calm. "Morning, Sergeant," Jordan replied, setting his toolkit down beside the F-117's port wing. "What's on the agenda today?" Bailey consulted his clipboard with the practiced efficiency of a man who lived by schedules and deadlines. "Standard Phase 2 inspection on this bird. engine intake systems, hydraulic pressure checks, avionics diagnostic sweep. The usual routine to keep our ghost flying. The crew referred to the F-117 as the Ghost, partly because of its stealth capabilities, but also because of its mysterious operational history. Many of the aircraft's missions remained classified decades after they were flown, leaving even the maintenance crews to wonder about the secrets their machine had witnessed. Tech Sergeant Nathan Ford joined them, carrying a diagnostic computer that would interface with the aircraft's internal systems. Ford was the hangar's electronics specialist, a thin, methodical man in his 30s who approached every technical problem like a chess master planning, moved several steps ahead. "Did you hear about the inspection today?" Ford asked as he began. Connecting cables to an access panel. Jordan looked up from the wing component he was examining. "What kind of inspection?" "We just had the Air Force auditors here last month." "Different this time," Bailey interjected, taking a long sip of his coffee. "Some civilian contractor from the Federal Aviation Administration. Aviation safety specialist. According to the notification I received yesterday afternoon." Ford rolled his eyes dramatically. Another bureaucrat with a clipboard who's probably never been closer to a military aircraft than the viewing area at an air show. These civilian contractors usually spend their time asking questions about regulations we've been following since before they graduated college. The crew had dealt with civilian inspectors before, well-meaning officials who understood aviation safety in theory, but lacked the hands-on experience that came from actually working on the machines they were evaluating. These inspections typically involved a lot of paperwork, basic questions about maintenance procedures, and observations that rarely led to meaningful insights about aircraft readiness. Airman Megan Scott, the hangar's newest addition, approached the group carrying a set of specialized tools for electronic systems testing. At 21, she was eager to prove herself worthy of working on such sophisticated aircraft. "I heard the inspector is supposed to be here around 0800, she mentioned. "Think they'll actually know anything useful about stealth aircraft?" Bailey chuckled, a sound that carried the weight of experience with countless bureaucratic encounters. "Scott, in my 22 years of service, I've learned that civilian contractors fall into two categories: the ones who know just enough to be dangerous, and the ones who know so little that they're harmless. Either way, we smile, answer their questions, and keep working." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Staff Sergeant Amanda Price, the hangar's communications specialist. Price carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned her stripes through competence rather than politics. Her job involved maintaining the complex communication and navigation systems that allowed stealth aircraft to operate in Copla's electronic warfare environments. "Morning, everyone," Price said, settling her equipment bag next to the aircraft's communication array access panel. "I take it we're all thrilled about another inspection?" "Thrilled might be a strong word," Jordan replied, using a torque wrench to secure a panel he had been examining. "But at least it breaks up the routine." The morning progressed with the familiar rhythm of professional maintenance work. Each crew member had their assigned systems and responsibilities, and they moved around the aircraft with the choreographed precision that came from months of working together. The F-117 was not an easy aircraft to maintain. Its stealth technology required specialized procedures and extreme attention to detail, but this crew had developed an almost intuitive understanding of their machine. Bailey coordinated the team's efforts while maintaining radio contact with the base operations center. The hangar's atmosphere was relaxed but focused, the kind of productive environment that developed when competent people were allowed to do work they genuinely cared about. At 0755, the side door of the hangar opened, allowing a shaft of bright desert sunlight to cut across the polished floor. The crew glanced up from their work, expecting to see their inspector, probably a middle-aged man in a business suit carrying a briefcase full of regulatory documents and safety checklists. Instead, A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun in a way that made immediate identification impossible. For a moment, no one moved. There was something about the figure's posture, the way they stood surveying the hangar, that suggested this wasn't going to be the routine inspection everyone had expected. The person who stepped into the hangar defied every expectation the crew had formed. No pressed business suit or government-issued polo shirt. No briefcase bulging with federal regulations or clipboard covered in safety checklists. No visitor badge prominently displayed or identification folder ready to be presented. Instead, a woman in her early 30s walked quietly into the space wearing simple, unmarked work coveralls that looked like they had seen actual use. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried only a standard tablet computer and a small, professional inspection kit. Nothing about her appearance screamed federal inspector or safety specialist. What struck the crew immediately was her movement. She didn't walk into the hangar like someone entering an unfamiliar environment. She moved like someone who belonged there, her steps confident and purposeful, her eyes already cataloging details and taking mental notes before she had even introduced herself. Jordan paused in his work, wrenched halfway to a bolt, and exchanged glances with Ford. This wasn't what they had been expecting. The woman approached the group with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in technical environments. Her visitor badge, clipped casually to her coverall pocket, identified her simply as V. Kane, aviation safety consultant. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and professional, but carrying an undertone of authority that seemed at odds with her civilian contractor status. "I'm Victoria Kane. I'll be conducting your safety evaluation today." Bailey stepped forward, extending his hand in greeting. "Master Sergeant Bailey, Hangar Chief. Welcome to Iron Eagle, Miss Kane." Victoria shook his hand with a firm grip that spoke of someone accustomed to physical work. "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate you accommodating the inspection on short notice." "No problem at all, ma'am," Bailey replied, though his eyes were already studying her with the analytical gaze of someone who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. "How long have you been doing safety evaluations?" "Long enough to know what to look for," Victoria replied diplomatically, already turning her attention to the F-117 with an intensity that seemed to go beyond professional curiosity. As she moved toward the aircraft, Jordan noticed something that made him pause. Victoria approached the stealth fighter not like an inspector seeing an unfamiliar machine, but like someone greeting an old friend. Her eyes traced the aircraft's distinctive lines with what almost looked like recognition, and when she stopped beside the port wing, she stood exactly where an experienced crew chief would position themselves for optimal observation. The morning was about to become much more interesting than any of them had anticipated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The crew's initial reaction to Victoria Kane was a masterclass in professional politeness, masking genuine skepticism. While they maintained the courteous demeanor expected when dealing with civilian contractors, their body language told a different story. Shoulders remained slightly tense, conversations became more formal, and the easy camaraderie that had characterized their morning routine shifted into something more guarded. Jordan Wells was the first to voice what everyone was thinking, though he waited until Victoria had moved to examine the aircraft's nose section before speaking in a low tone to Tech Sergeant Ford. "That's our big federal inspector?" he muttered, adjusting his grip on a diagnostic probe. "She looks like she just walked off a factory floor somewhere." Ford glanced over at Victoria, who was now crouched beside the F-117's forward landing gear, making notes on her tablet with the methodical precision of someone conducting a thorough evaluation. "Appearances can be deceiving, Wells. Maybe she knows her stuff." "Come on," Jordan replied, his voice carrying the confidence of youth and 3 years of specialized training. Look at her. No government briefcase, no official entourage, no stack of regulations to reference. I bet she's never even seen a stealth aircraft up close before today. Master Sergeant Bailey overheard the exchange and decided to intervene before the speculation got out of hand. Wells Ford, focus on your work. Ms. Kane is here to do a job, and we're here to do ours. Professional courtesy applies regardless of what we think about her qualifications. The gentle rebuke carried the weight of Bailey's 2 decades of experience managing both aircraft and personnel. He had learned long ago that assumptions about people's capabilities often said more about the person making the assumption than about the subject being evaluated. But privately, Bailey had to admit that Victoria Kane didn't fit the typical profile of a federal aviation safety specialist. Most civilian contractors who worked with military aviation came from one of 2 backgrounds: former military personnel who had transitioned to civilian roles, or academic types with impressive credentials, but limited hands-on experience. Victoria seemed to fit neither category. Her coveralls were clean but showed signs of actual use, small stains that suggested familiarity with hydraulic fluid. Fabric worn smooth in places where tool belts typically rested, sleeves that had been rolled up and down countless times during technical work. These were not the coveralls of someone who wore them as a costume for official visits. They belonged to someone who actually worked in them. Staff Sergeant Amanda Price noticed something else that struck her as unusual. Victoria's inspection kit contained tools that were both more sophisticated and more specialized than what most safety inspectors carried. Where a typical contractor might bring basic measuring devices and documentation cameras, Victoria's kit included electronic, diagnostic equipment that appeared to be military grade and considerably more expensive than standard civilian inspection. Tools. Sergeant Bailey, Price said quietly, approaching the hangar chief while Victoria was occupied with examining the aircraft's communication array housing. Have you seen inspection equipment like that before? Bailey followed Price's gaze to where Victoria had opened her kit and was connecting a small diagnostic computer to an external port on the VF-117's communication system. The device in her hands was definitely not standard civilian equipment. That's interesting, Bailey murmured, his professional curiosity now genuinely piqued. That looks like military-grade testing equipment. Expensive stuff. Not the kind of thing the FAA typically issues to contractors. Meanwhile, Airman Scott was having her own moment of confusion as she observed Victoria's inspection technique. Unlike the methodical checklist-driven approach most civilian inspectors used, Victoria seemed to be conducting her evaluation based on some internal framework that wasn't immediately apparent. She would spend considerable time examining certain components, while barely glancing at others that were typically the focus of safety inspections. "Ma'am," Scott said, approaching Victoria with genuine curiosity, "I notice you're spending a lot of time on the avionics cooling system. Is there a particular safety concern with that component?" Victoria looked up from the access panel she had been studying, her expression thoughtful. "Not a safety concern exactly, but cooling system efficiency directly impacts operational reliability. If the electronics overheat during extended missions, you risk cascade failures that could compromise more than just safety." The answer was both accurate and surprisingly sophisticated, demonstrating an understanding of aircraft systems that went beyond basic safety protocols. Scott found herself nodding in agreement, though she couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria's knowledge seemed more operational than regulatory. As the morning progressed, the crew began to notice other anomalies in their inspector's behavior. Victoria moved around the aircraft with a spatial awareness that suggested deep familiarity with the F-117's layout. She knew instinctively where to step to avoid interfering with ongoing maintenance work, positioned herself at optimal angles. For examining components, and navigated around the aircraft's complex geometry without the hesitation typical of someone seeing it for the first time. Jordan, still somewhat skeptical but increasingly puzzled, decided to test Victoria's knowledge with a technical question that went beyond basic safety requirements. "Miss Kane," he said, looking up from the avionics panel he was testing, "I'm seeing some irregular readings on the navigation system's secondary processor. The primary systems all check out fine, but there's a minor variance in the backup calculations. Would that be something your safety evaluation would flag?" It was a legitimate technical issue, but also a subtle challenge. Jordan was curious to see whether Victoria would deflect the question to avoid revealing her limitations, or if she might actually have insights that could help resolve the problem. Victoria approached Jordan's workstation and examined the diagnostic readouts on his equipment. After a moment of careful study, she pointed to a specific line of data. "The variance you're seeing is likely related to the GPS reference clock synchronization," she said matter-of-factly. "The backup processor is receiving timing signals that are microseconds off from the primary system. It's not a safety issue, but it could affect navigation accuracy during extended flights in GPT-denied environments." Jordan stared at her, his skepticism beginning to crack. "That's actually exactly right. How did you know that?" Victoria's expression remained professionally neutral. "It's a known characteristic of this navigation system configuration. The timing synchronization issue appears in about 15% of these aircraft after extended service periods." The specificity of her knowledge was troubling. GPS-denied navigation procedures were classified information, not typically included in civilian safety training. Jordan found himself wondering exactly what kind of background check the FAA conducted on their contractors. Tech Sergeant Ford, who had been listening to the exchange while working on nearby systems, decided to conduct his own informal test. "Ms. Kane, since you're familiar with the navigation systems, what's your assessment of the current software configuration?" "We're running version 4.7 of the mission planning software." Victoria paused her note-taking and considered the question. "Version 4.7 has good stability, but it has known issues with target designation updates during rapid course changes. Most experienced pilots develop workarounds for those limitations." Ford's eyebrows rose involuntarily. The software version information wasn't classified, but knowledge of its specific operational limitations definitely was. Victoria had just demonstrated familiarity with details that were typically only known by pilots who had actually flown combat missions in the F-117. Master Sergeant Bailey, who had been monitoring these exchanges with growing concern, decided it was time for a more direct conversation. He approached Victoria as she concluded her examination of the aircraft's forward sensor array. "Ms. Kane, if you don't mind me asking, what's your background in military aviation? Your knowledge seems quite comprehensive." Victoria looked at Bailey directly, her expression remaining professionally composed, but her eyes showing a flicker of something that might have been caution. "I have extensive experience with military aircraft systems, Sergeant. The FAA values consultants who understand both civilian and military aviation requirements." It was a diplomatic non-answer that revealed nothing while technically addressing the question. Bailey recognized the verbal technique. He had used similar approaches himself when dealing with inquiries that touched on classified information. As Victoria continued her inspection, moving to examine the aircraft's weapon-based systems, the crew found themselves caught between growing respect for her obvious expertise and increasing confusion about her actual identity and qualifications. The woman they had initially dismissed as just another bureaucratic contractor was demonstrating knowledge that seemed far beyond what any civilian safety inspector should possess. Her familiarity with classified operational procedures, her sophisticated diagnostic equipment, and her intuitive understanding of the F-117's complex systems all pointed to a background that was significantly more complicated than her official credentials suggested. Jordan, now completely abandoning his initial skepticism, watched Victoria examine the weapon bay's electronic systems with the practiced eye of someone who had done it many times before. "Sergeant Bailey," he said quietly, "I don't think she's just a safety inspector." Bailey nodded grimly. "I'm beginning to reach the same conclusion, Wells. The question is, what is she really, and why is she here?" As the morning sun climbed higher over Iron Eagle Air Force Base, casting sharper shadows across the hangar floor, the crew of Hangar 6 found themselves facing a mystery that was becoming more intriguing by the hour. Their routine safety inspection was turning into something far more complex, and Victoria Kane was proving to be much more than anyone had initially assumed. That the comfortable certainty of their morning routine had been replaced by a growing sense that they were witnessing something significant, though none of them yet understood exactly what that might be. By mid-morning, the atmosphere in Hangar 6 had shifted into something resembling a careful dance between professional courtesy and growing suspicion. The crew continued their maintenance routines, but their attention was increasingly divided between their assigned tasks and the enigmatic woman who moved among them with unsettling familiarity. Victoria Kane had progressed to examining the F-117's engine intake systems, a critical component that required specialized knowledge to properly evaluate. Most civilian inspectors would rely heavily on technical manuals and checklists when dealing with such sophisticated systems. Victoria, however, approached the intakes with the confidence of someone who had worked with them extensively. She knelt beside the port engine intake, running her fingers along the edges with a tactile examination that spoke of hands-on experience. The intake design was crucial to the aircraft's stealth characteristics. Any damage or misalignment could compromise the plane's radar signature and potentially make it visible to enemy detection systems. Airman Megan Scott, who had been assigned to assist with the inspection, watched Victoria's technique with growing fascination. "Ma'am, are you checking for specific damage patterns?" Most inspectors just do visual confirmation and move on. Victoria continued her examination, her fingers detecting subtle irregularities that weren't visible to casual observation. Stealth aircraft are particularly sensitive to intake geometry variations. Even minor deformations can create radar reflections that compromise the aircraft's effectiveness. The statement was technically accurate, but it revealed knowledge that went far beyond standard safety protocols. Scott exchanged a meaningful glance with Jordan, who had been listening while working on nearby systems. "That's pretty advanced knowledge for a safety inspector," Jordan commented, trying to keep his tone casual while probing for more information. Victoria looked up from her work. Her expression remained professionally neutral. "The FAA requires comprehensive understanding of all aircraft systems, including military-specific technologies." It was another diplomatically evasive answer, but Jordan noticed something interesting. When Victoria spoke about the aircraft's stealth characteristics, her voice carried a subtle undertone of personal investment, as if she was discussing something she genuinely cared about, rather than simply evaluating for regulatory compliance. "Tech." Sergeant Ford approached the group, carrying a diagnostic tablet that displayed complex waveform patterns from the aircraft's electronic systems. "Ms. Kane, since you're familiar with stealth technology, could you take a look at these radar cross-section measurements? We're seeing some unusual readings in the X-band frequencies." Victoria accepted the tablet and studied the data with intensity that seemed to go well beyond professional curiosity. Her eyes moved across the waveforms with the rapid pattern recognition of someone who had analyzed similar data many times before. "The anomaly you're seeing isn't actually a problem," she said after a moment. "It's a characteristic signature of the intake design when the aircraft has been configured for extended range missions. The additional fuel weight slightly alters the aircraft's structural resonance, which shows up in X-band measurements. Ford stared at her, his professional skepticism now completely replaced by genuine confusion. How could you possibly know? That? Those correlations between fuel load and radar signature are classified research data. I've been working on stealth aircraft for 8 years, and I only learned about that relationship last month during advanced training. Victoria handed the tablet back to Ford, her expression remaining carefully controlled. Experience with similar aircraft systems teaches you to recognize patterns in the data. But Ford wasn't satisfied with the vague explanation. Ms. Kane, what other aircraft systems have you worked with? Because that level of detailed knowledge suggests hands-on operational experience, not regulatory oversight. For the first time since her arrival, Victoria hesitated slightly before responding. It was a barely perceptible pause, but in a hangar full of people trained to notice mechanical irregularities, the momentary uncertainty was as obvious as a flashing warning light. I've consulted on various military aircraft programs over the years, she said finally. You develop expertise through exposure to different systems and operational requirements. Master Sergeant Bailey, who had been observing the interaction from across the hangar, decided it was time for a more direct approach. He walked over to the group, his demeanor friendly, but his eyes sharp with the analytical focus that had served him well during 2 decades of military service. Ms. Kane, Bailey said, I'm curious about your inspection methodology. Most civilian contractors follow standardized checklists, but you seem to be using a more intuitive approach. Victoria closed her tablet and turned to face Bailey directly. For a moment, the carefully maintained facade of civilian bureaucrats slipped slightly, replaced by something that looked remarkably like military bearing. Effective inspection requires understanding how systems behave under operational stress, she replied. Checklists are useful, but they don't always capture the subtle indicators that experienced personnel learn to recognize. Experienced personnel, Bailey repeated thoughtfully. What kind of operational experience are we talking about, exactly? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria studied Bailey's face, seeming to weigh her response carefully before speaking. Sergeant, I spent considerable time around military aviation. You develop instincts about these machines when you understand how they're actually used, not just how they're supposed to work according to technical manuals. Asterisk, it was the most revealing statement Victoria had made since her arrival, but it raised more questions than it answered. Bailey found himself wondering what kind of considerable time around military aviation would give a civilian contractor such detailed operational knowledge. The conversation was interrupted by an unexpected demonstration of Victoria's expertise that left no doubt about her unusual qualifications. Airman Scott had been struggling with a persistent electronic fault in the aircraft's communication system, a problem that had been intermittently appearing for several days, despite multiple diagnostic attempts. Miss Kane, Scott said, frustration evident in her voice, since you seem to understand these systems pretty well, do you have any ideas about this communication fault? We've replaced 3 different components, but the error keeps reappearing. Victoria, approach the open access panel and examine the complex array of electronic modules and connections. The communication system was one of the most sophisticated components on the aircraft, integrating multiple radio frequencies, satellite links, and encrypted channels into a single network that allowed the pilot to maintain contact with ground forces and command centers during missions. After studying the system for several minutes, Victoria reached into the panel and made a small adjustment to a component that Scott hadn't even considered examining. She repositioned a single connector and tightened a locking mechanism that appeared to be properly secured. Immediately, the diagnostic display cleared, showing green status indicators across all communication channels. Scott stared at the display in amazement. How did you know to do that? I've been troubleshooting this system for 3 days, and I never would have thought to check that particular connection." Victoria's explanation was both technically accurate and deeply troubling. That connector is prone to loosening under vibration loads during high G maneuvers. It maintains electrical contact for ground testing, but fails intermittently during actual flight operations. Most maintenance personnel don't encounter the problem because it only manifests under specific flight conditions. The silence that followed was profound. Victoria had just demonstrated knowledge of a failure mode that could only be learned through extensive operational experience, the kind of experience that came from flying combat missions, not from conducting safety. Inspections. Jordan found his voice first. "Ma'am, how could you know about failure modes during high-G flight operations?" "That information comes from pilot reports and flight test data that aren't typically shared with civilian contractors." Victoria seemed to realize that her expertise had revealed more than she had intended. Her professional mask slipped back into place, but not before the crew had seen something that looked remarkably like the confidence of someone who had personally experienced the flight conditions she had just described. "Complex systems develop predictable failure patterns," she said carefully. "Experienced technical personnel learn to recognize these patterns through various sources of information." But the explanation felt hollow now. Tech Sergeant Ford, Airman Scott, and Jordan exchanged glances that communicated their shared realization. Victoria Kane possessed operational knowledge that extended far beyond what any civilian safety inspector should have access to. Master Sergeant Bailey made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. As Victoria continued her inspection, moving toward the aircraft's navigation systems, Bailey quietly accessed a secure computer terminal in the hangar office. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency as he initiated a personnel background search. The query he entered was simple: Victoria Kane, civilian contractor, aviation safety specialist. The results that appeared on the screen made Bailey's breath catch in his throat. According to the database, Victoria Kane existed as a certified aviation consultant with appropriate security clearances. But when Bailey dug deeper, accessing military personnel records through his security credentials, he found something that made no sense at all. Buried in a classified archive, accessible only to personnel with specific operational clearances, was a single reference to a V. Kane associated with a stealth aircraft program 5 years earlier. The file was heavily redacted, but what Bailey could see made his hands shake slightly as he scrolled through the limited information. The reference was connected to something called Operation Silent Thunder, a classified mission that had apparently involved F-117 aircraft. Most of the details were blocked from his access level, but one piece of information was clearly visible. The mission had resulted in pilot casualties. Bailey stared at the screen, trying to process what he was seeing. A Victoria Kane had been connected to a classified stealth aircraft operation 5 years ago, but the woman currently inspecting their F-117 was supposedly a civilian contractor with no military background. He printed the limited information he could access and walked back into the hangar, his mind racing with possibilities that ranged from mistaken identity to something far more complex and potentially dangerous. As he watched Victoria continue her inspection with the practiced movements of someone intimately familiar with every aspect of the aircraft, Master Sergeant Christopher Bailey began to suspect that their routine safety evaluation had become something entirely different and potentially far more significant than anyone had realized. The mystery of Victoria Kane was deepening, and Bailey had the uncomfortable feeling that they were all about to discover something that would change their understanding of everything they thought they knew about their mysterious inspector. Master Sergeant Bailey stared at the classified database results for a full minute before closing the terminal screen. The fragments of information he'd discovered about Operation Silent Thunder and the mysterious V. Kane connection were like pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a clear picture. What he'd found raised more questions than answers. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear: Victoria Kane was not the person she claimed to be. Bailey folded the printed documents and slipped them into his pocket, his mind already formulating a plan. 22 years in the Air Force had taught him that when something didn't add up, the best approach was methodical investigation combined with careful observation. He needed to gather more information before drawing any conclusions, but he also needed to ensure the security of his hangar and crew. Meanwhile, Victoria had moved to examine the F-117's cockpit systems, climbing the maintenance ladder with the fluid confidence of someone who had done it countless times before. Her movements were economical and precise, betraying none of the hesitation typical of someone unfamiliar with the aircraft's unique geometry and access points. From his position near the aircraft's nose section, Jordan watched Victoria settle into the pilot's seat with growing amazement. Most civilian inspectors would spend considerable time orienting themselves to the complex array of controls and displays that filled the F-117's cockpit. Victoria, however, immediately began examining specific systems with the targeted focus of someone who knew exactly what to look for and where to find it. "Ma'am," Jordan called up to her, "are you familiar with this particular cockpit configuration? You seem to know your way around pretty well." Victoria paused in her examination of the flight control systems, looking down at Jordan with an expression that seemed to weigh how much to reveal. "All military cockpits share certain commonalities," she said finally. "Once you understand the basic principles, the specific layouts become more intuitive." It was another carefully neutral response, but Jordan noticed something that made him frown. Victoria's hands had been resting on the flight controls with the natural positioning of someone who had actually flown the aircraft. Her fingers had automatically found the correct grip positions. Her feet had settled onto the rudder pedals at the proper angle, and her posture in the ejection seat was exactly what flight training manuals recommended for optimal control response. These were not conscious movements that could be learned from studying technical diagrams. They were muscle memory responses that developed only through extensive flight experience. Tech Sergeant Ford approached the aircraft's starboard side, where he'd been working on the electronic warfare systems. "Miss Kane," he called up to the cockpit, "I'm seeing some interesting readings on the threat detection array. Would you mind taking a look at these parameters?" Victoria climbed down from the cockpit and joined Ford at his workstation, where multiple computer screens displayed complex signal analysis data. The electronic warfare systems were among the most classified components on the aircraft, designed to detect and counter enemy radar and missile guidance systems. Ford pointed to a series of waveform patterns on his primary display. "These signatures are showing some unusual characteristics. The system is functioning normally, but the detection algorithms are flagging patterns that don't match our threat library." Victoria studied the data with an intensity that immediately concerned Ford. Her eyes moved across the displays with the rapid pattern recognition of someone who had analyzed similar information under operational conditions. After several minutes of careful examination, she pointed to specific elements of the signal patterns. "Those aren't threat signatures," she said with quiet certainty. "You're seeing reflections from the new air traffic control radar they installed at Nellis last month. The frequency range overlaps with certain surface-to-air missile systems, which is why your threat library is flagging it." Ford stared at her, his professional composure beginning to crack. "Miss Kane, how could you possibly know about the new radar installation at Nellis? That information was classified in our briefings, and it definitely wouldn't be available to civilian contractors." For the first time since her arrival, Victoria looked genuinely uncomfortable. She had just demonstrated knowledge of classified operational intelligence that no safety inspector should possess. The information about the Nellis radar installation had been briefed to squadron personnel only 2 weeks earlier, with specific instructions that it was not to be discussed with unauthorized personnel. Consulting work requires staying current with various technical developments, Victoria said. But her voice lacked the confidence of her previous responses. Staff Sergeant Price, who had been monitoring the conversation while working on nearby communication systems, stepped closer to the group. "Ma'am, respectfully, that's not information that would be available through normal consulting channels. You're describing specific classified intelligence about radar installations and their operational characteristics." The tension in the hangar was becoming palpable. What had begun as casual curiosity about an unusual inspector was evolving into serious concern about potential security breaches. Victoria Kane had demonstrated knowledge that suggested access to classified information systems far beyond what her credentials should allow. Airman Scott, who had been quietly observing the escalating situation, decided to conduct her own test of Victoria's mysterious expertise. She approached the group carrying a maintenance manual filled with technical diagrams and specifications. "Miss Kane," Scott said, opening the manual to a complex schematic of the aircraft's flight control systems, "could you help me understand this hydraulic routing diagram? I'm having trouble tracing the backup systems through the wing structure." Victoria accepted the manual and studied the diagram, but something about her examination technique immediately caught Scott's attention. Instead of following the schematic lines with her finger like most people would, Victoria traced the actual hydraulic routing from memory, occasionally glancing at the diagram only to confirm specific connection points. "The backup hydraulic system routes through the wing route here," Victoria explained, pointing to locations on the diagram while simultaneously gesturing toward the corresponding points on the actual aircraft. "If you lose primary pressure, the backup system automatically engages, but there's a 3-second delay while the pressure accumulators charge." Scott followed Victoria's explanation with growing amazement. The level of detail was extraordinary. But what truly concerned her was the way Victoria described this system behavior. She wasn't reading from the manual or reciting technical specifications. She was describing the hydraulic system's performance from personal experience. "Ma'am," Scott said carefully, "the information you just provided about system response times isn't in this manual. Those performance characteristics come from actual flight testing and pilot reports." Victoria closed the manual and handed it back to Scott, but not before the crew had noticed something significant. Her hands were shaking slightly, a barely perceptible tremor that suggested the mounting pressure of maintaining her cover story was beginning to affect her composure. "Master," Sergeant Bailey, who had been watching these interactions with growing concern, decided it was time for a more direct approach. He approached Victoria as she prepared to continue her inspection of the aircraft's weapon systems. "Miss Kane," Bailey said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting straight answers, "I need to ask you some direct questions about your background and qualifications." Victoria turned to face Bailey, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained civilian demeanor slipped entirely. The person who looked back at Bailey wasn't a federal contractor or safety inspector. It was someone with the bearing and confidence of a military officer. "What kind of question, Sergeant?" Victoria asked, and her voice had taken on a subtle but unmistakable tone of command authority. Bailey noticed the change immediately. In his experience, only people with significant military leadership experience spoke with that particular combination of confidence and expectation of being obeyed. "I'm curious about your military background," Bailey said directly. "The knowledge you've demonstrated today suggests extensive operational experience with stealth aircraft. That's not the kind of expertise civilian contractors typically possess." Victoria considered Bailey's question for a long moment, and the crew could see her weighing her response carefully. When she spoke, her answer was more revealing than anything she had said previously. "Sergeant, some people have backgrounds that are complicated. My qualifications for this inspection are legitimate, but they may not be entirely what they appear to be. It was the first time Victoria had admitted that her official credentials didn't tell the complete story. Bailey exchanged meaningful glances with Ford and Price, all of whom were now convinced they were dealing with someone whose true identity was significantly different from what they had been told. The afternoon was progressing, but the routine safety inspection had transformed into something resembling an interrogation. Victoria's expertise was undeniable, but it was also impossible to explain within the framework of civilian aviation consulting. Every technical conversation revealed knowledge that pointed toward extensive military operational experience. The kind of experience that came from flying combat missions, not from conducting regulatory evaluations. As Victoria prepared to examine the aircraft's weapon systems, Bailey made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. He quietly activated the hangar's internal security recording system, ensuring that their conversations with their mysterious inspector would be documented for later analysis. The crew of Hangar 6 was beginning to realize that they were participants in something far more complex than a routine inspection. Victoria Kane possessed knowledge and expertise that defied explanation, and her carefully constructed cover story was beginning to unravel under the weight of her own competence. Bailey looked at his watch and noted that Victoria had been at Iron Eagle for over 4 hours. In that time, she had demonstrated familiarity with classified operational procedures, intimate knowledge of the F-117's performance characteristics, and technical expertise that suggested years of hands-on experience with stealth aircraft systems. Question was no longer whether Victoria Kane was who she claimed to be. It was clear that she wasn't. The real question was who she actually was, and why she was at Iron Eagle Air Force Base conducting an inspection that was revealing far more about her than about the aircraft she was supposedly evaluating. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the hangar floor, everyone could sense that they were approaching a moment of truth. The careful dance of professional courtesy and growing suspicion was about to give way to something more direct and potentially more dangerous. Victoria Kane's secret, whatever it was running out of time. The afternoon sun was casting longer shadows across Hangar 6 when Captain Lucas Gray arrived unannounced, accompanied by 2 individuals whose presence immediately changed the entire atmosphere of the facility. The first was a woman in Air Force intelligence uniform whose crisp bearing and calculating eyes suggested someone accustomed to dealing with security matters. The second was a man in civilian clothes whose government identification and serious demeanor marked him as federal law enforcement. Master Sergeant Bailey noticed their arrival through the hangar office windows and felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. Unscheduled visits from intelligence personnel usually meant one of 2 things. Either something had gone very wrong, or something was about to go very wrong. "Sergeant Bailey," Captain Gray called out as he entered the hangar, his voice carrying an undertone of urgency that immediately put the ground crew on alert. "I need to speak with you about your civilian contractor." Bailey approached the group of officials, acutely aware that every member of his crew was now watching the interaction with growing concern. "Sir, is there a problem with Ms. Kane's credentials?" The intelligence officer, whose nameplate identified her as Major Sarah Chun, stepped forward. "Sergeant, we've been monitoring some unusual database queries related to classified personnel records. Several of those queries originated from terminals in this hangar." Bailey felt heat rise in his cheeks. His earlier research into Victoria's background had apparently triggered security protocols he hadn't been aware of. "Ma'am, I was concerned about some inconsistencies in our contractor's knowledge base. I conducted a routine background verification." Routine background verification doesn't typically involve accessing classified mission archives, the civilian investigator said, consulting a tablet that displayed Bailey's search history. "You specifically queried Operation Silent Thunder, which is classified at levels well above your clearance." The mention of Operation Silent Thunder caused an immediate reaction from Victoria, who had been examining the F-117's navigation systems on the opposite side of the hangar. Her head snapped up at the words, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked completely. The expression that crossed her face was one of recognition mixed with what looked remarkably like pain. Tech Sergeant Ford, who was working nearby, noticed Victoria's reaction and quietly alerted the others. "Something's happening," he murmured. To Jordan and Scott, "She just went completely rigid when they mentioned that operation." Captain Gray followed Ford's gaze and focused on Victoria for the first time since entering the hangar. His expression shifted from bureaucratic concern to something approaching recognition, though he seemed unable to place exactly what he was seeing. "Miss Kane," Gray called out, his voice carrying across the hangar, "could you join us for a moment?" Victoria closed her inspection tablet and walked toward the group with movements that had become noticeably more guarded. As she approached, Bailey noticed that her posture had shifted into something that looked distinctly military, shoulders back, measured steps, alert awareness of everyone around her. Major Chun studied Victoria's face with the analytical intensity of someone trained in behavioral assessment. "Ms. Kane, I'm Major Chun, Air Force Office of Special Investigations. We need to discuss some irregularities regarding your background and credentials." "What kind of irregularities?" Victoria asked, and her voice had taken on a carefully controlled tone that suggested someone preparing for interrogation. The civilian investigator consulted his tablet before responding. "Your contractor credentials show appropriate security clearances for civilian safety inspections, but your demonstrated knowledge today suggests access to information that should be well beyond those clearances." Victoria remained silent, but Bailey could see her calculating her response. The careful verbal dance she'd been performing all day was about to end, one way or another. "Specifically," Major Chun continued, "you've demonstrated detailed knowledge of classified radar installations, intimate familiarity with stealth aircraft operational procedures, and technical expertise that suggests extensive flight experience. We need to understand how a civilian contractor acquired this information." The hangar had fallen completely silent except for the distant hum of ventilation systems and the occasional sound of aircraft operations from other parts of the base. Every member of the ground crew was watching the confrontation with fascination and growing concern. Victoria looked directly at Major Chun, and something fundamental shifted in her demeanor. The deferential civilian contractor facade disappeared entirely, replaced by someone with the confidence and bearing of a senior military officer. "Major," Victoria said, her voice now carrying unmistakable command authority, "I think we need to have this conversation in a more private setting." Captain Gray stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Ms. Kane, or whoever you are, you're going to need to provide some immediate answers. We have a potential security breach involving classified information and possibly compromised personnel." For several tense seconds, Victoria said nothing. The crew could see her weighing options and making calculations about how much to reveal. When she finally spoke, her words sent shockwaves through everyone present. "Captain Gray, my name is Victoria Kane. 5 years ago, I held the rank of captain in the United States Air Force. I was the pilot in command during Operation Silent Thunder." The silence that followed was profound. Master Sergeant Bailey felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Operation Silent Thunder had been referenced in the classified archives as a mission that had resulted in pilot casualties. According to official records, anyone connected to that operation should be either dead or retired from active service. Major Chun's expression had shifted from professional skepticism to intense interest. "Captain Kane, according to our records, all personnel associated with Operation Silent Thunder are listed as killed in action. You're supposed to be dead." Victoria's response was delivered with quiet dignity, that carried the weight of 5 years of carefully maintained secrets. Captain Victoria Kane died during Operation Silent Thunder. What survived was classified too highly to continue existing officially. The implications of her statement began to sink in for everyone present. Jordan, who had dismissed Victoria as an incompetent bureaucrat just hours earlier, found himself staring at someone who had apparently been living under a false identity for half a decade. "Ma'am," Bailey said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what happened during Silent Thunder?" Victoria's expression darkened, and for the first time since revealing her identity, she looked genuinely vulnerable. "We accomplished our mission objectives, Sergeant. But the cost was significant. The political and operational ramifications required that certain participants be officially removed from the record." Captain Gray was consulting his own tablet, accessing what appeared to be highly classified information. "According to what I can see here, Operation Silent Thunder involved a solo penetration mission into heavily defended airspace. The pilot successfully completed the mission, but was subsequently declared killed in action for operational security reasons." "Why?" Airman Scott asked, stepping forward despite the obvious sensitivity of the conversation. "Why would they declare you dead if you survived?" Victoria looked at Scott with an expression that mixed professional respect with deep sadness. "Sometimes, Airmen, missions require actions that can't be officially acknowledged. When success comes at a cost that would create international incidents if revealed, the participants have to disappear." Tech Sergeant Ford, who had been processing the implications of Victoria's revelation, spoke up with a question that had been troubling him. "Captain, what have you been doing for the past 5 years? How does a dead pilot end up conducting safety inspections?" Victoria's answer revealed the true scope of her sacrifice and commitment. "I've been maintaining operational readiness, Sergeant. Moving from base to base under various contractor identities, ensuring that our aircraft and crews are prepared for the missions that conventional oversight might miss." Major Chun was taking notes as Victoria spoke, clearly recognizing the significance of what they were hearing. "You've been operating as an unofficial inspector, using your expertise to evaluate readiness for classified operations." "That's correct, Major. Someone has to ensure that when the impossible becomes necessary, our people are ready." The civilian investigator looked up from his tablet with an expression of amazement. "Ms. Captain Kane, do you realize how many bases you've visited over the past 5 years? How many aircraft you've evaluated? The scope of what you've been doing is extraordinary." Victoria nodded quietly. 43 installations, Major. Over 200 aircraft evaluations. I've identified and corrected maintenance issues that could have compromised dozens of critical missions. Bailey found himself looking at Victoria with completely new eyes. The woman he had initially dismissed as an unqualified contractor had actually been conducting the most comprehensive and knowledgeable aircraft readiness assessment in Air Force history. "Captain," Bailey said, "when you fixed our communication system this morning, you knew exactly what the problem was because you'd encountered it during actual flight operations." "That's correct, Sergeant. I've experienced that particular failure mode during combat missions. It's the kind of problem that doesn't show up in ground testing but can be critical during operational flights." Captain Gray was still processing the implications of Victoria's revelation. "Captain Kane, your expertise and dedication are remarkable, but your current status creates significant complications. Officially, you don't exist. Unofficially, you've been conducting unauthorized inspections of classified facilities." Victoria straightened to full military attention, and everyone in the hangar could see the pilot and officer she had once been. "Sir, I accept full responsibility for my actions. I violated regulations by operating under false credentials, but I believed my duty to maintain operational readiness superseded bureaucratic protocols." Major Chun closed her tablet and looked directly at Victoria. "Captain, I think we need to have a much longer conversation about your activities and your current status. This situation is far more complex than a simple security breach. As the afternoon sun continued to sink lower over Iron Eagle Air Force Base, the crew of Hangar 6 found themselves witnesses to one of the most extraordinary revelations in military aviation history. Their routine safety inspection had uncovered a ghost from a classified past, a pilot who had sacrificed her official existence to continue serving her country in ways that no one had imagined possible. Victoria Kane stood among them no longer as a mysterious contractor, but as a fellow military professional whose dedication had exceeded anything they had previously encountered. The questions now were what would happen to her, and whether her years of unofficial service would be recognized or punished. The mystery had been solved, but the consequences were just beginning. The intense conversation in Hangar 6 was suddenly interrupted by a sound that every military professional recognized instantly: the base-wide emergency alert system. The piercing wail of klaxons echoed across Iron Eagle Air Force Base, accompanied by flashing red lights that transformed the afternoon atmosphere into something urgent and potentially deadly. "Attention all personnel." The base public address system crackled to life, the voice of the command center controller tight with stress. "Code red emergency. Repeat, code red emergency. All flight crews and emergency personnel report to stations immediately." This is not a drill. The effect on everyone in the hangar was immediate and profound. Major Chun and Captain Gray immediately activated their personal communication devices, receiving encrypted updates about whatever crisis was unfolding. The civilian investigator stepped aside to make secure phone calls, his earlier interest in Victoria's background suddenly relegated to secondary importance. Master Sergeant Bailey's military instincts kicked in automatically. "Wells, Scott, forward. Secure all maintenance equipment immediately. If we're going to code red, this bird might need to fly." The ground crew moved with practiced efficiency, their earlier fascination with Victoria's revelation temporarily set aside as they focused on their primary responsibility: ensuring their aircraft was ready for whatever mission might be required. Victoria stood motionless in the center of the suddenly chaotic hangar, but her stillness was not that of confusion or uncertainty. Instead, she had the focused calm of someone whose mind was already processing tactical scenarios and operational requirements. Her eyes moved from the F-117 to the crew preparations to the officials receiving emergency briefings, calculating and assessing with the rapid analysis of a combat pilot. Captain Gray ended his communication call and turned to face the group, his expression grim. "We have a situation developing overseas. Special Operations Team has gone dark in hostile territory. Last communication indicated they were compromised and under heavy fire." Major Chun consulted her secure tablet, reading intelligence updates in real time. 12 operators from the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment are pinned down approximately 400 miles inside enemy airspace. Weather conditions and electronic warfare environment make conventional rescue impossible. What about other assets? Bailey asked, his professional concern for American soldiers overriding any curiosity about bureaucratic protocols. "Closest conventional air support is 6 hours away," Captain Gray replied. "The team's emergency beacon indicates they have maybe 2 hours of ammunition and defensive position remaining." The mathematics of the situation were stark and unforgiving. 12 elite American soldiers were going to die unless someone could reach them within the next 2 hours. But the nearest conventional rescue assets were too far away, and the operational environment was too hostile for standard aircraft to penetrate successfully. Victoria stepped forward, her voice cutting through the growing tension with quiet authority. "Captain Gray, what about stealth assets? An F-117 could penetrate that airspace." Gray looked at Victoria with an expression that mixed professional respect with bureaucratic frustration. Captain Kane, our primary stealth pilot, is currently hospitalized with severe injuries from a training accident yesterday. Major Phillips won't be flying anything for at least 6 weeks. What about backup pilots from other bases? Major Chun asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be satisfactory. Minimum response time from Nellis is 4 hours, Gray replied. From Edwards, it's even longer. Those soldiers will be dead before any qualified pilot can get here. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of impossible mathematics. Everyone in the hangar understood that 12 American soldiers were about to die, not because of enemy superiority or tactical failure, but because of simple logistics and timing. Victoria looked directly at the F-117 Nighthawk, her expression shifting into something that the crew was beginning to recognize as her true personality, not the deferential civilian contractor or even the revealed former captain, but the combat pilot who had once accepted an impossible mission and somehow survived to accomplish it. "Sir," Victoria said, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions, "I request permission to volunteer for this mission." The reaction in the hangar was immediate and electric. "Captain." Gray stared at Victoria as if she had just proposed something completely impossible. Major Chun looked up from her intelligence briefings with an expression of amazement mixed with concern. "Captain Kane," Gray said carefully, "you're officially dead. You have no current flight status, no mission authorization, no legal standing to fly military aircraft. If something goes wrong, 12 soldiers die who might otherwise live." Victoria interrupted, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of steel that brooked no argument. "Sir, those operators don't care about my official status or bureaucratic complications. They need someone who can fly this mission." The civilian investigator approached the group, his earlier interest in investigating security breaches now completely focused on the developing crisis. "Ms. Captain Kane, are you actually qualified to fly combat missions in current aircraft?" Victoria's answer revealed the true scope of her experience and the depth of her sacrifice. "I've been maintaining flight proficiency for 5 years through classified training programs. Every base I've visited, every aircraft I've inspected, it's all been preparation for exactly this kind of situation." Master Sergeant Bailey, who had spent the day gradually discovering the layers of Victoria's hidden expertise, spoke up with a question that addressed everyone's concerns. "Captain, are you saying you've been actively training for combat missions while officially dead?" "That's correct, Sergeant. Someone has to be ready when conventional assets aren't available, and the mission requires capabilities that officially don't exist." Tech Sergeant Ford was examining readiness reports on his diagnostic equipment. "Captain, if you're serious about this, our aircraft is fully mission capable. Fuel, weapons, all systems are green." Victoria nodded, already shifting into operational planning mode. "What's the tactical situation? Enemy air defenses, weather, extraction requirements." Major Chun consulted her intelligence tablet, recognizing that they were now discussing an actual mission rather than theoretical possibilities. "Heavy surface-to-air missile coverage, sophisticated radar network, mountainous terrain that limits CONVENTI, ONL approach routes. The Special Operations Team is in a valley that's essentially surrounded by hostile forces." "Electronic warfare environment?" Victoria asked, her questions revealing the systematic thinking of someone who had planned and executed similar missions before. "Extensive jamming across multiple frequency ranges," Captain Gray replied, his tone suggesting he was beginning to take Victoria's proposal seriously despite its apparent impossibility. "Communication with the team will be intermittent at best." Victoria absorbed the tactical information with the rapid processing of someone whose mind was built for combat planning. "Time to target?" "Approximately 90 minutes at maximum speed," Major Chun calculated. That gives us maybe 30 minutes of operational window, Victoria said, more to herself than to the others. Tight, but manageable if everything goes perfectly. Airman Scott, who had been listening to the tactical discussion with growing amazement, asked the question that was troubling everyone. Captain, what happens if this mission fails? If you're captured or killed? Victoria's answer revealed the full weight of what she was proposing to sacrifice. Airman, I've been officially dead for 5 years. If this mission fails, there are no international complications, no diplomatic incidents, no official connections to the United States Air Force. Complete deniability. Captain Gray was consulting with superior officers through his secure communication system, receiving guidance about a situation that had no precedent in modern military operations. When he ended his call, his expression was troubled but resolute. Captain Kane, he said formally, I've been authorized to inform you that if you choose to undertake this mission, it will be entirely unofficial. No orders, no authorization. No support beyond what this base can provide. If anything goes wrong, officially, it never happened. Victoria straightened to full military attention, and everyone in the hangar could see the pilot, who had once accepted an impossible mission and paid for its success with her official existence. Sir, I understand and accept those conditions. Those soldiers are going to die if someone doesn't act. I'd rather risk everything trying to save them than do nothing and guarantee their deaths. The base emergency klaxons continued their urgent wailing, but inside Hangar 6, a different kind of history was being made. A pilot who had sacrificed her identity to serve her country was about to risk everything one more time, not for glory or recognition, but simply because 12 American soldiers needed someone to try the impossible. The ghost was about to fly again, and everyone present understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary, the return of a legend who had never really left, just waited in the shadows for the moment when her unique capabilities would be needed. Most dock time was running out, but Victoria Kane was finally going home. The transformation that occurred in Hangar 6 was nothing short of extraordinary. Within minutes of accepting the mission, Victoria Kane shed the last vestiges of her civilian contractor persona and emerged as the combat pilot she had always been. Beneath the carefully constructed facade, her movements became precise and economical. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making split-second decisions under extreme pressure, and her entire bearing radiated the confidence that came from years of successfully completing impossible missions. Sergeant Bailey, Victoria called out, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of operational command. I need this aircraft prepped for immediate combat launch. Full weapons load, maximum fuel, and complete systems check in the next 20 minutes. Bailey responded with the automatic efficiency of someone who had spent decades following orders from competent officers. Yes, ma'am. Wells Ford Scott, emergency launch configuration move. The hangar exploded into controlled chaos as the ground crew shifted from routine maintenance operations to combat mission preparation. Tools that had been used for careful inspection were quickly stowed and replaced with equipment needed for weapons loading, fuel systems checks, and pre-flight verification procedures. Major Chen approached Victoria with a secure tablet displaying real-time intelligence updates about the trapped Special Forces team. Captain, the situation is deteriorating rapidly. The team's last communication indicated they're down to approximately 30% ammunition and have multiple wounded who can't be moved. Victoria accepted the tablet and studied the tactical information with the rapid analysis of someone whose survival had once depended on processing complex operational data under extreme time pressure. The intelligence painted a picture of 12 elite soldiers trapped in an increasingly hopeless situation, surrounded by enemy forces and terrain that made conventional rescue impossible. What's their exact position? Victoria asked, her fingers moving across the tablet to access detailed topographical maps and satellite imagery. Grid coordinates 34.7821 north, 69.4532 east, Major Chun replied. They're in a rocky outcropping approximately 8 kilometers northeast of the primary target area. The position provides some defensive advantage, but they're completely surrounded. Victoria memorized the coordinates instantly, her mind already calculating approach routes, weapons release parameters, and extraction procedures. The kind of mental preparation that had once made her one of the Air Force's most effective stealth pilots was reasserting itself with frightening clarity. Captain Gray joined the tactical discussion, bringing additional intelligence from higher command levels. Captain Kane, the enemy has deployed significant surface-to-air missile systems around the area. Conventional aircraft would be detected and engaged before getting within 50 kilometers of the target. That's why they need stealth capability. Victoria replied, continuing to study the intelligence data. The F-117 can penetrate that defensive envelope, but it'll require precise navigation and perfect timing. Tech Sergeant Ford approached with the aircraft's mission planning computer, already loaded with flight profiles and targeting data. Captain, I've programmed the basic navigation route based on the intelligence. You'll need to fly nap of the Earth, through these mountain valleys to avoid radar detection. Victoria examined the proposed flight path with the critical eye of someone who understood that navigation errors in hostile territory typically resulted in death. The route was complex and dangerous, requiring the aircraft to fly at extremely low altitudes through mountain terrain while avoiding multiple radar installations and missile sites. This approach vector is good, Victoria said, making minor adjustments to the flight plan. But I'll need to modify the final attack profile based on what I see when I get there. The intelligence is accurate, but battlefield conditions change rapidly. Airman Scott was connecting weapon systems cables under the aircraft's belly, preparing to load precision-guided munitions that would be used to neutralize enemy forces surrounding the trapped soldiers. Captain, what's your preferred weapons configuration for this type of mission? Victoria's answer revealed both her extensive combat experience and her understanding of the specific tactical requirements they were facing. Mix of small-diameter bombs for precision strikes against infantry positions and larger, penetrating warheads for any armored vehicles. I want maximum flexibility to adapt to whatever I find when I arrive. As the weapons loading continued, Master Sergeant Bailey approached Victoria with flight gear that had been retrieved from secure storage. The equipment was current-generation pilot survival gear, not the kind of equipment that would typically be available for civilian contractors. Captain, Bailey said quietly, this gear was requisitioned for classified training exercises. It should be exactly what you need for this mission. Victoria accepted the flight gear with a slight smile that suggested she wasn't entirely surprised by its availability. Sergeant, I suspect there are aspects of my presence here that are more complicated than anyone realized. The implication of her statement wasn't lost on Bailey. Victoria's arrival at Iron Eagle, her extensive knowledge of the F-117 systems, her immediate availability when an impossible mission arose, it was beginning to seem less like coincidence and more like careful planning. Ma'am, Bailey said, lowering his voice further, were you actually here for a routine safety inspection? Victoria paused in her equipment check, considering how much to reveal. Sergeant, I've been maintaining readiness for situations exactly like this one. Sometimes being in the right place at the right time requires careful preparation. The conversation was interrupted by urgent radio communications from the base command center. The voice of Colonel Samuel Rivera crackled through the hangar's communication system, tight with the stress of managing a rapidly developing crisis. Hangar 6, this is base command. What's the status on emergency launch preparation? Captain Gray responded immediately. Command, we have a qualified pilot and aircraft ready for immediate deployment. Mission profile is high-risk stealth penetration for special operations support. There was a brief pause before Colonel Rivera's voice returned, carrying the weight of command responsibility and the knowledge that he was authorizing something unprecedented. Understood, Hangar 6. Be advised that this mission is completely unofficial. No records, no after-action reports, no acknowledgement of participants or activities. Victoria keyed the hangar's communication system herself, her voice carrying across the airwaves with the confidence of someone accepting ultimate responsibility. Command, this is the pilot. I understand and accept all conditions. Mission priority is extraction of trapped personnel. All other considerations are secondary. Roger, pilot. You are authorized for immediate launch. Weather conditions are marginal, but within acceptable parameters. Time to target is critical. You have approximately 40 minutes before the team's position becomes untenable. As Victoria completed her pre-flight preparations, she took a moment to address the ground crew who had spent the day discovering her true identity and were now preparing to send her on a mission that could easily result in her death. Bailey, Wells Ford. Scott, she said, her voice carrying genuine gratitude and respect. Thank you. Not just for today, but for taking care of this aircraft and being ready when it was needed. That's what makes missions like this possible. Jordan stepped forward, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by professional admiration. Captain, what you're doing, ... it's incredible. Those soldiers don't even know you exist, but you're risking everything to save them. Victoria's response revealed the core principle that had guided her through 5 years of unofficial service and was now driving her to accept another impossible mission. Wells, that's what we do. We serve people who can't protect themselves, often without recognition or appreciation. It's not about glory, it's about duty. She climbed into the F-117's cockpit, settling into the ejection seat with the fluid movements of someone returning home after a long absence. Her hands moved across the control surfaces with practiced familiarity, conducting pre-flight checks with the systematic thoroughness that had kept her alive through countless dangerous missions. The aircraft's engines spooled up with their characteristic deep rumble, filling the hangar with sound and vibration that seemed to resonate in everyone's chest. The F-117 Nighthawk was coming alive, transforming from a museum piece into a weapon of war, guided by one of the most skilled pilots in military aviation history. Iron Eagle Tower, this is Ghost Rider requesting immediate launch clearance, Victoria's voice came through the radio system, using the call sign she had carried during her years of official service. Ghost Rider, you are cleared for immediate takeoff. Runway 09, winds light and variable. Godspeed, pilot. As the hangar doors opened completely and the F-117 began taxiing toward the runway, the ground crew of Hangar 6 stood in respectful silence. They had witnessed something extraordinary, the transformation of a mysterious civilian contractor into a combat pilot whose dedication and skill represented the very best of military service. Master, Sergeant Bailey spoke for all of them when he said quietly, 12 soldiers are about to get a miracle they'll never understand. The Ghost Rider was flying again, carrying with her the hopes of 12 trapped soldiers and the respect of everyone who had discovered that sometimes legends never really die. They just wait in the shadows for the moment when they're needed most. The afternoon sun was fading over Iron Eagle Air Force Base as the distinctive silhouette of the F-117 Nighthawk disappeared into the distance, bound for a rendezvous with destiny that would determine whether 12 American soldiers lived or died. In the quiet that followed the aircraft's departure, everyone understood that they had been witnesses to something that would never appear in official records, but would never be forgotten by those who had seen it happen. Victoria Kane was going to war one more time, and this time, everyone was counting on the Ghost to bring miracles. 8,000 miles from Iron Eagle Air Force Base, Captain Victoria Kane guided the F-117 Nighthawk through hostile airspace at an altitude that would have been considered suicidal by most military pilots. The aircraft skimmed less than 200 feet above mountainous terrain, following valleys and ridgelines with precision that pushed both machine and pilot to their absolute limits. The cockpit display showed a maze of enemy radar installations, painting the sky with detection beams that would instantly reveal any conventional aircraft. But the F-117's stealth characteristics allowed Victoria to thread through gaps in the electronic net like a ghost moving through solid walls. Her hands moved across the controls with the fluid precision of someone whose survival depended on perfect integration with her machine. Eagle 6, this is Ghost Rider. Victoria transmitted over the encrypted emergency frequency, knowing that communication in the electronic warfare environment would be intermittent at best. I am inbound to your position. Authenticate. With challenge code Bravo 7 Alpha. The response came through crackling static, the voice tight with exhaustion and desperation. Ghost Rider. Eagle 6. Authentication Charlie 9 Delta. We are critically low on ammunition. Multiple wounded. Enemy forces are preparing final assault. Victoria checked her navigation display, calculating distance to target and available time for mission execution. The mathematics were unforgiving. She had perhaps 10 minutes to locate the trapped soldiers, neutralize surrounding enemy forces, and coordinate extraction before the team's position was overrun. The terrain below was a labyrinth of rocky outcroppings and steep valleys that provided excellent defensive positions, but made precise targeting extremely difficult. Victoria would need to identify enemy positions while avoiding civilian casualties and ensuring that her weapon strikes didn't accidentally harm the soldiers she was trying to rescue. Eagle 6, I need your exact position marked. Can you illuminate with infrared strobes? Ghost Rider, strobes are active. Be advised, enemy has armor support moving into position. We count at least 4 main battle tanks converging on our location. Victoria's tactical display identified the infrared signatures of the trapped Special Forces team, surrounded by heat signatures indicating substantial enemy forces. The tanks mentioned by the team leader were particularly problematic. Their armor would require precision strikes with penetrating warheads, but their proximity to the American soldiers made targeting extremely dangerous. Banking the F-117 into a steep turn that stressed the airframe to its design limits, Victoria positioned herself for the attack run that would determine whether 12 American soldiers lived or died. Her finger moved to the weapons release controls, selecting small diameter bombs programmed for minimal blast radius but maximum penetration. Eagle 6, danger close fire mission inbound. Keep your heads down for the next 60 seconds. Victoria's first pass targeted the armored vehicles that posed the greatest threat to the trapped team. The precision-guided munitions streaked from the F-117's internal weapons bay, their guidance systems locked onto laser-designated targets that Victoria had identified during her approach. The explosions that followed were carefully calculated to destroy the tanks without creating excessive fragmentation that could harm nearby friendly forces. Direct hits on armor, the team leader reported through the radio static. Enemy infantry is falling back to secondary positions. But Victoria's mission was far from complete. The intelligence briefings had been accurate about enemy numbers, the mountainous terrain concealed additional forces that were now repositioning to continue their assault on the Special Forces team. Victoria would need to make multiple attack passes to neutralize all threats, each one increasing her risk of detection and engagement by enemy air defenses. Banking into her second attack run, Victoria targeted enemy infantry positions that had been revealed by their movement during the first strike. Her weapon selection shifted to area effect munitions designed to neutralize personnel while minimizing structural damage to the rocky terrain that provided cover for the American soldiers. Ghost Rider, be advised enemy surface-to-air missiles are now active. We're seeing launch signatures from multiple locations. Victoria's threat warning system screamed alerts as enemy missile batteries locked onto her aircraft. The F-117 stealth characteristics provided some protection, but the close-range engagement and multiple attack passes had made her increasingly visible to sophisticated detection systems. Eagle 6, on taking SAM fire. Continuing attack run on remaining targets. The next few minutes became a deadly dance between Victoria's piloting skills and the enemy's increasingly desperate attempts to shoot down the aircraft that was systematically destroying their assault forces. Victoria twisted the F-117 through violent evasive maneuvers while simultaneously conducting precision strikes against targets that threatened the trapped soldiers. Missile trails streaked past the cockpit as Victoria pulled the aircraft through G-forces that pushed both pilot and machine to their limits. Her training and experience allowed her to maintain tactical awareness even while conducting extreme defensive flying, keeping track of remaining targets while avoiding the growing number of surface-to-air missiles being launched at her position. Ghost Rider, enemy forces are retreating. Repeat, hostiles are withdrawing from our position. Victoria completed her final attack pass and banked away from the target area, her aircraft system showing multiple warning lights from the stress of combat maneuvering and the electromagnetic effects of nearby missile explosions. But the F-117 was still flying, and more importantly, the trapped Special Forces team was no longer under immediate threat. Eagle 6, area is clear for extraction. Recommend you move to primary landing zone for helicopter pickup. Roger, Ghost Rider. Moving to extract LZ now. Unknown pilot, you just saved 12 American lives. We don't know who you are, but we'll never forget what you did today. Victoria's response carried the quiet satisfaction of someone who had successfully completed an impossible mission. Just doing my job, Eagle 6. Safe journey home. Part 9. Resolution and Recognition. The return flight to Iron Eagle Air Force Base was both triumphant and melancholy for Victoria Kane, the F-117. Nighthawk had performed flawlessly during the mission, its stealth characteristics and precision weapons systems proving once again why it remained one of the most effective aircraft ever built. But as Victoria flew through the darkness toward home, she knew that her 5 years of living in the shadows were finally coming to an end. The successful rescue mission had been monitored by military command centers around the world, and Victoria's return to active flying status, even unofficially, had triggered discussions at the highest levels of government about her unique situation and extraordinary capabilities. Ghost Rider, Iron Eagle Tower. You are cleared for immediate landing. Runway 09. Emergency vehicles are standing by as precautionary measure. Tower, Ghost Rider, negative on emergency vehicles. Aircraft is mission capable with minor systems degradation. Requesting standard approach. As the F-117 touched down on Iron Eagle's main runway and taxied back toward Hangar 6, Victoria could see that word of the successful mission had spread throughout the base. Ground crews from other hangars had gathered to witness the return of the aircraft that had just completed one of the most daring rescue missions in recent military history. Master Sergeant Bailey and his crew were waiting information as Victoria shut down the engines and opened the cockpit canopy. Their expressions mixed professional pride with personal admiration for what they had witnessed throughout the day. "Welcome home, Captain," Bailey said as Victoria climbed down from the cockpit. "How did the mission go?" Victoria's response was delivered with the understated professionalism that characterized the best military aviators. 12 soldiers are going home to their families tonight, Sergeant. Mission accomplished." Captain Gray approached with a secure communication device, his expression indicating that significant developments had occurred during Victoria's absence. Captain Kane, I have Major General Thomas Clark on the line from the Pentagon. He wants to speak with you immediately. Victoria accepted the communication device, knowing that her unauthorized mission had undoubtedly created ripples throughout the military command structure. When she activated the secure connection, the voice that greeted her carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of military personnel. Captain Kane, this is General Clark. First, let me say that what you accomplished today was extraordinary. 12 Special Forces operators are alive because of your actions. Thank you, sir. I was simply doing what needed to be done. Captain, your situation has been under review at the highest levels since your identity was revealed earlier today. The unauthorized nature of your recent activities has been complicated to evaluate. Victoria understood that she was facing potential court-martial for her years of operating under false credentials and conducting unauthorized inspections of military facilities. But she had accepted those risks when she volunteered for the rescue mission. Sir, I take full responsibility for my actions. I violated regulations by operating under false identities, but I believe the mission requirements justified the risks. General Clark's response surprised everyone within hearing range. Captain, the Pentagon has reached a different conclusion. Your 5 years of unofficial service have been extraordinary. The aircraft readiness evaluations you conducted, training you maintained, the dedication you showed, it represents service above and beyond anything we could have officially requested. The conversation continued with revelations that fundamentally changed Victoria's understanding of her situation. Her years of moving between military bases, conducting inspections under various identities, had not been as unauthorized as she had believed. Certain elements within the military command structure had been aware of her activities and had quietly supported her mission. Captain Kane, effective immediately, you are being reinstated to active duty with the rank of Major. You will be assigned to command a new unit specializing in rapid response operations, requiring unique capabilities and operational flexibility. Victoria felt emotions she had suppressed for 5 years beginning to surface. The prospect of returning to official military service, of serving openly rather than in the shadows, represented a homecoming she had never dared to hope for. Sir, what about the security issues? My unofficial activities, the false credentials? Captain, your activities are being reclassified as deep cover operations, conducted under special authorization. There will be no disciplinary action. Instead, you're being recognized for exceptional service to your country. Part 10. New beginning. 6 months after the events at Iron Eagle Air Force Base, Major Victoria Kane stood in dress uniform before a gathering of military personnel, government officials, and family members who had believed for 5 years that she was dead. The ceremony, taking place in a secure Pentagon conference room, was unprecedented in military history. The official resurrection of a pilot whose death had been necessary for operational security, but whose continued service had proved invaluable to national defense. General Clark stepped forward to present Victoria with decorations that recognized not only her successful rescue mission, but her 5 years of unofficial service maintaining aircraft readiness across the military's most sensitive installations. Major Kane, General Clark announced to the assembled audience, your dedication to duty, even when that duty required complete anonymity and personal sacrifice, represents the highest ideals of military service. The ceremony concluded with Victoria's assignment to her new command, the Rapid Response Aviation Unit, a specialized organization tasked with providing immediate air support for missions that fell outside conventional operational parameters. It was a role that would allow her to use her unique skills and experience while serving openly as a recognized military officer. Master Sergeant Bailey, Tech Sergeant Ford, Jordan Wells, and Megan Scott had been flown to Washington to attend the ceremony. their presence representing the ground crews who had supported Victoria's mission and discovered her true identity. Their expressions reflected pride in having served alongside someone whose dedication had exceeded anything they had previously encountered. After the formal proceedings concluded, Victoria approached the crew from Hangar 6 with genuine gratitude for their role in her return to official service. "Sergeant Bailey," Victoria said, "I want you to know that your professionalism and dedication made everything possible. Without ground crews like yours, pilots like me can't accomplish anything meaningful." Bailey's response reflected the mutual respect that had developed between them. "Major, it was an honor to serve with you. We always knew there was something special about our mystery inspector." Jordan stepped forward with a question that had been troubling him since learning Victoria's true identity. "Ma'am, what you did for those soldiers, they'll never know who saved them. Doesn't that bother you?" Victoria's answer revealed the principle that had guided her through 5 years of invisible service and would continue to guide her future military career. "Wells, the best kind of service is the kind that doesn't require recognition. Those soldiers are alive, their families are whole, and that's what matters. Glory is less important than results." As the ceremony participants began to disperse, Victoria found herself looking toward a future that combined the operational capabilities she had maintained during her years in the shadows with the official support and recognition that would allow her to serve more effectively than ever before. The woman who had once been declared dead to serve her country's interests was finally fully alive again, not as a ghost moving through the shadows, but as a recognized leader whose unique experiences and capabilities would continue to protect those who needed protection most. Major Victoria Kane had come home, and the skies would never be the same. The ghost pilot had become real again, carrying with her the knowledge that sometimes the greatest service requires the greatest sacrifice, and that duty extends beyond recognition, beyond official acknowledgement, beyond even official existence. Legend had been real all along. She had just been waiting for the right moment to step back into the light and continue serving the country and the people she had never stopped protecting. Even when the world believed she no longer existed. In the end, Victoria Kane had proved that true dedication knows no boundaries, accepts no limitations, and requires no applause, only the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled and lives saved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.